All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to today's Omni Live. Today, we're going to talk a little bit more about the DBT and BI workflow. I'm Chris Merrick, co-founder and CTO of Omni. Before we dive in, just want to let people know that we're recording so you can get access to this later if you need to jump out in the middle. And also, if you have any questions, feel free to add those into the chat and we'll try to answer those at the end. To get started, we can do a little intro. Hey, Jack, how are you? You want to intro yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, everybody who might be listening. My name is Jack. I'm a solutions engineer here at Omni. So I spend a lot of time in the field working with folks on Omni and also just kind of helping out across the BI stack or the data stack with them as well. So a lot of time seeing DBT out in the field too.
And like I said, I'm Chris Merrick, co-founder and CTO here at Omni. Also, in a past life, in 2016, I helped write some of the very early versions of DBT. And additionally, I was the CTO of a company called Stitch that does data transformation and data pipelining, where I also worked in the Singer open source project for data integrations. So like we said, we're going to talk about the BI and DBT workflow today. Jack, like you said, works with a lot of customers. Jack, we see DBT a lot, right?
Yep. Yeah, I think I would say at least 70-80% of the folks we work with tend to be using DBT, and it's just quite prevalent. I believe you've said last time, as common as breathing air is a pretty good analogy there. It's everywhere in the data space today.
Yeah, and Jack's working with a lot of our customers implementing DBT together with BI. I end up talking to a lot of customers just about like how Omni views DBT, as a BI tool and kind of our view of where it fits into the overall solution. And really that view kind of goes back all the way to when we founded Omni. One of the things that we said to ourselves is that the modeling and analyzing are really not very different. I think of them as two sides of the same coin. If you're building a data model, it's really helpful to actually be able to visualize the data, maybe see a table of the data, work through edge cases, understand cardinality of the data, understand the distribution of the values in certain columns of the data, etc. And then on the flip side, if you're doing an analysis, anytime you're writing SQL, or building a query of any form, really, like there's some amount of modeling going on, right? You probably need some additional dimensions, need to tweak the measures you're using or the aggregations you're using, et cetera. So, these two ideas, they're really sort of tightly combined. And so, one of the founding premises of Omni is that the workflow between analysis and modeling should really be very tight, right? This is an iterative process. We shouldn't think of modeling as something that happens, before analysis happens. It's something that's always happening as you analyze. And so, for us, that means that the way we actually structure the product is around this idea of layered models. And Jack, if you could flash up that diagram we have to kind of illustrate what we're talking about. And Jack, do you want to just do a quick explainer on this, and then I'll dive back into it?
Yeah, absolutely. So essentially, the way we think of Omni is a couple different layers. So as Chris mentioned, we sit on top of your warehouse layer down here at the bottom. So we're referencing that architecture that you have in your schema that oftentimes is built or reinforced or enriched by DBT models. So a lot of folks are building up additional tables or they're kind of codifying logic at the warehouse layer. Within Omni, though, we also have an additional shared data model layer. And this is really where a foundational level of BI semantic logic can sit. Sometimes you might not want all of that hardened back at the warehouse level. It may not make sense to have everything living strictly in DBT. But beyond that, we also have this additional workbook layer up top here. And the great thing about the workbook layer is it will inherit from the shared data model layer. So we'll take all that logic that's there, which is also encoding and reading in all that logic from the schema and DBT as well. But we can provide a nice little playground where folks can really iterate and sandbox and build stuff out. While we also have fluidity to move between those layers. I know, Chris, that was a big thing that Omni is really focused on, is just really allowing folks to model at different layers and having that fluidity between the within the product, but also outside the product as well, from Omni to DBT and the warehouse layer.
Exactly. And I think the key piece here is that this goes both ways. So it both means that, if you start with a DBT model, it should be very easy to augment that, right in the context of, in this case, like a workbook, right? So if your DBT model is missing a dimension, you should just be able to write a quick query, just sort of define that dimension right on top of it and not worry about modifying the DBT model. So, you need to really be able to sort of flex and augment and alter the model as you're querying. And, the beautiful thing about DBT is it's just SQL. SQL's composable, so it's very easy to do that. But you need a good workflow around that. And that's what Omni's really trying to provide. And then I think the other piece is, like Jack said, like, you may, after you've done your analysis, decide, oh, wait, this is actually something that I need to govern, or I need to share with other things, or I want to materialize, for example. And now I want to push it down to DBT. And that workflow needs to be simple too. I've talked to so many companies and data teams who sort of talk about like sort of, their data engineers on the one side who are responsible for DBT, and sort of their other analysts on the other side. And I think everybody's trying to adopt this more analytics engineering mentality, and I think that mentality is really, I think that is what we're talking about here. But not everybody has quite gotten there. One of the things I've heard a few times is like, oh, like my analysts understand all the business logic, but they can't touch DBT. And guess what? Sometimes business logic should belong in DBT, but there's really no good sort of workflow for that model and for that code to flow between the two. So that's what we're really trying to provide here. Jack, do you want to just dive into the demo of how this actually works?
Yeah, sure thing. So what I'll do before we jump into that demo right away, just kind of want to highlight and recap those use cases as Chris mentioned here. So we have 4 main use cases that we really see for DBT in our integration that we have today. The first is surfacing changes in DBT models within Omni. So oftentimes folks are rapidly changing data in DBT, and a lot of the ways we built Omni was on the assumption that warehouses will be fluctuating because of tools like DBT that are very rapidly shifting data underneath the BI layer. So when you're changing column names, when you're changing table names, or adding new columns or adding net new tables, we can absorb that very seamlessly. We have a button, which we'll actually show you in a little bit, called Refresh Schema, that will pull all that information through. And this can actually even be done automated with our API as well. So you can have basically a hands-off process where you hit DBT build, that goes through and actually kicks off into Omni to pull all that through automatically in the BI layer. The second here really goes hand in hand with the first. It's really just bringing that metadata in DBT, those view and column level descriptions that you might be creating, into the BI layer as well. So eliminating the need for any duplication of work. You don't need to create them all in DBT for where it might be used downstream elsewhere, but then the BI is the special kind of edge case where you have to go and rewrite all that stuff. We did away with that. We can pull that through automatically. The third is the ability to create net new models from Omni into DBT. Super important for 2 key reasons, which Chris really touched on earlier. The first is when we're modeling unfamiliar data, it's just super critical to touch and feel that. We might not know what the shape and form of that might look like, the dimensionality, the values. A super common example for this is JSON data. We might not know what that blob looks like in advance, so we really might need a nice way to kind of on the fly model this and then fluidly move it between levels. The second is really all about that fluidity, as Chris mentioned. Oftentimes we might not know if something's going to be long-lived or that starts as an ad hoc analysis, if it really becomes something that's going to be a codified weekly, monthly, quarterly analysis, or something that's just useful to have hardened at the warehouse level. So that fluidity and the lightweight gestures to move things between layers where it makes sense for things to live is part of the power of Omni there as well, especially with our integration in DBT. The last one here is really just around ensuring minimal breaking changes as you move data from prod schema or dev schemas into prod schemas. Oftentimes, the BI layer is probably pointing at prod schemas in DBT, but with Omni, we can actually open up a branch and point at a dev schema. You can see how the changes in your dev schema are going to impact your BI layer, make the appropriate changes in advance, and then when you decide to move that data from dev to prod in DBT, we can also merge Omni in lockstep there to prevent any breaking changes and have a really nice seamless experience for your end users. So that's a kind of high level of some of the 4 main use cases. We'll actually jump through a demo that will show off the first 3 in some flavor. And this will be really focused around just what a typical like analyst workflow might look like. So let's go ahead and jump in. I'll go ahead
And just
and oh,
Hey, Jack, just real quick, I think while you're pulling that up, one thing I wanted to make sure is clear is that we talk about data modeling in Omni and data modeling in DBT, and our view is that the data modeling exists in both those layers. In DBT, a data model is a SQL definition with some potentially additional markup like Jinja. In Omni, what a data model is we have a YAML spec that defines our data model, which our system then translates into SQL. So it's SQL as well. But I just want to make sure that was clear that like data models happen in Omni as well. Ours happen at query time, right? Like we run our data model, like our YAML definition informs how we generate SQL against your data warehouse. And then that often is running on top of a DBT model as well. So just want to make sure that was clear.
yeah, no, that's a great call out too. The language can definitely matter there, the specificity. I think there's a lot of shared kind of lingo across the space. So that's a great call out. Awesome. So what we'll do here is I'll jump right into just a demo in Omni. So we're in this workbook interface. And over on the left, I can see I'm looking at this user facts table that's been built up. And I've got some information here about my users, things like age, location, gender, name, their total spend, and just like account star of the table. You'll notice one thing that's missing from here, though, it's pretty common to have in a lot of user-based tables, is actually the user email. And the reason for this in this case was that our prod DB wasn't actually capturing user email at the time when this table was built out. Now, if I talk to our engineering team, they'd let me know that email was actually just dropped in. So we can go ahead and pull that into our DBT model that builds up this table. And then we can actually pull that back into Omni automatically with the refresh schema. And then we'll go ahead and actually build out a little bit of analysis around email domain, which is what I'm really hoping to look at today. So I'll open my tab in DBT here, and I can see I've got the model that builds up this user facts table. And what I'll do is I'll actually just go ahead and drop in a nice little additional column here. And we'll go ahead and just pull in the email field from that table that we're pulling from. And I'll go ahead and augment this group by and order by as well, just to make sure that the SQL syntax is happy. And I'll go ahead and wait real quick just to commit and sync this. I'll just say adding email to user facts table. And we'll wait for this to run while we'll build the model. What we're going to do here, as mentioned, this is something that could be automated with the API. So we could have a process that actually would kick this off automatically to pull all this through. And we'll see that this is going to go ahead and run for us. We can see our user facts table went successfully, so that's great. But I'll show you actually the manual process just to give a flavor of everything that's going on. So I'll jump to this third tab. As Chris mentioned, this will actually show us our Omni model. And this is going to be YAML-based file view that will compile to SQL at query time, as Chris mentioned. So what we can see in here today is our set of descriptions for the table. So I can see that I'm pulling in a table level description that came from DBT. I could also have them at the field level. We also have our DBT config as well. So I can see how this model is actually being built right here in Omni. Now, you'll notice the email field isn't yet in here. So I'll go ahead under my model menu here and hit this refresh schema button. And what this will do is it'll kick off a process that will go back to the warehouse and pull all this new information in automatically. So unlike some other tools out there in the BI space where you might need to go and manually handwrite these in, we can actually see as email will flow through here to make it nice and easy to have that seamless process. And now I can see that's available in my table. So let's flip back to our workbook view. And in here, I can refresh and I can now see emails in here. Now, if I want to get domain out of email, I pull this into the field just to take a look at the values. I could go ahead and write some kind of complicated SQL to pull out the substrings, or I could just ask AI. So I'll go ahead and hit this button here in Omni to get a natural language formula, and I'll just say, give me the domain from email, and I'll go ahead and hit run. And the great thing here is we're actually not even passing any of the values of this column in. We're just passing the column header in directly. And our API that we're using for this can actually infer based on that how it should be writing these functions. And what we get as an output here is actually just an Excel function. And I can click in here and I can see it up top in this bar that we have this nice text-based function that's going through and finding the @ symbol. It's finding the position that is within the string and then returning everything after that. This is probably a pretty straightforward function for anyone who knows Excel super well. But it can be a little tricky to pull off right off the top of your head if you're going to work with this stuff every day, and can just be a really nice accelerator to have AI write these things for you. Now, what's cool is this is right now just a one-off table calculation that's tied to this email field. We can see obviously there's cell references to it in this directly. But what we can do is I can actually go ahead and right-click on this and promote this into my workbook. And what we'll see there is this is now its own field in my workbook. So as we kind of think about those layers initially, this now exists in our workbook model as not just a one-off thing and doesn't have to exist with a dependency on the email field. So I can go ahead and remove that there. I can also pull in things like a count of users by domain. And let's say I actually want to see a sum of all the spend. Now I could go ahead and right-click on user spend here, which is our dimensional level value. I can go to aggregates and quickly create a sum here. So now I can see the total sum by domain that's been spent, as well as the total amount of users. Let's say for the last part of this, I really just want to look at the average spend per user. So I can go ahead and right-click on that column header for user facts count. And similar to our AI use, I can actually go ahead and just freehand write calculations as well. And we have a wide library of Excel functions here that we're really matching the syntax one-to-one exactly. But I can even just do simple things like B1 divided by C1. Go ahead and hit enter here, and I can go ahead and update this column name. We'll just call it like average user spend. Now, when I've created this, we very seamlessly have just created a bit of Excel logic that makes it really accessible for business users to interact with the tool and really get a lot of value out of this here. And as Chris mentioned, one of the big things is we don't want to segment off logic from business users, which can have valuable knowledge of how things should be codified or defined, and leave that all up to the folks just with access to dbt. So a lot of the power and process of Omni is having the ability to democratize the ability to build these things and provide flows and logic for what can be moved across these layers. So once again, I'll promote this into our table here, just so we have this as another field if we do want to use it. And if I actually want to move this into dbt, I can go into the model menu here, and I have an option for push to dbt. And what this will do is it'll give me the option to give this a name. I'll call this like domain facts for my new dbt model. And what this will actually do is it'll open up a new branch in my Git repo. So I can go ahead and click on this to open that up and take a look. I can scroll to the bottom to see the SQL that Omni is writing, where I can see we've got some substring work being done here to extract the domain. And I can see we're doing just a simple sum for that total user spend. I can also see we're doing some edge case handling here for null references for our Excel calculations. Now, the great thing here is I started out with very basic Excel style calculations, just doing B1 divided by C1. That all compiles back to SQL. So business users are able to write very powerful logic that can still be run at the warehouse level and push back to things like dbt as well. So now that I have this here, I can actually push this through any process that I might already have in place for my Git processes that are tied to dbt. If I want to have these PRs approved by other users, we can do that. We can move it through any existing processes and CI/CD that we may have. I could go ahead and create a pull request. I could merge this in back to my demo branch, which is tied to that initial repo we showed, and interact with this back in the dbt Cloud IDE. So I know that was a little bit of a whirlwind tour, but what we do have there helps kind of show off some of what we have in our dbt integration. Obviously, there's quite a bit more that we have to show about Omni and dbt, but for the sake of today, we wanted to keep it short. So with that, I'll pass it back to you, Chris.
Thanks, Jack. That was great. So we did get a question into the chat. The question is there a pushback to dbt sort of functionality for when you have a model in Omni that you want to codify the DB? And I think Jack showed a very similar flow to that. The reality is too, like, you can take an Omni model within the workbook. So if that hadn't started as a query, but rather was a sort of view in Omni, you could easily within the workbook sort of preview that view and then push it to dbt in a very similar way. So that is that question is 100% the workflow that we're going for here. So yeah, that's all the questions I see right now. So we will wrap it up. Thanks to everybody for joining. There's a lot more here. We're going to continue to try to go live to talk about these things going forward. If there's any other topics you'd like us to talk about, please leave us a comment and we'll do that. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Take care all.